Hello, welcome to Southern Tier Gardening. My name's Eric. In tonight's video, I wanted to show you guys a couple things that are happening right now in my garden that aren't ideal. I'm dealing with a couple things in my garden that aren't going to plan, and I was just gonna show you guys what's going on and talk a little bit about that. So I still consider myself a beginning gardener. I've been gardening for 5 years in my backyard here in South Georgia, Zone 8B. But I still learn stuff every day. Hey Mabel, checking out the cucumbers? I still learn stuff every day, and gardening can be very challenging, and it can be very frustrating, especially for beginning gardeners. So I kind of just wanted to show you guys a couple things, like I say, that are happening in my garden that aren't ideal, and how I sort of manage that. Over here we've got, these are my tomato plants over here. Just kind of walk through this area pretty quick. This is a part of the garden that's coming along real well. I've got quite a few tomatoes starting to form. But let's go over here. One of the reasons I kind of wanted to do a video like this is because anyone who knows me knows I like to share pictures of my garden, and most of the time those pictures are things that I'm very proud of, or things that have gone well in the garden, my successes, successful harvests. But I also want you guys to know that for everything that goes well in my garden, I have a lot of challenges. I have a lot of crop failures. I have plants that die. I have plants that never produce fruits. So I kind of want to show the good and the bad with these videos. So we can start with right here. If you guys, you can see this tomato plant right here. Last week, this plant was very healthy. It looked no different than this one right next to it. And this shows you how quickly things can take a turn. This tomato plant is definitely does not look good. I would call it dead. I did have a couple small tomatoes there developing, but this plant just doesn't look good, and I don't think it's going to make it. Something I did observe, if I can get down here, if you look at the stem of the plant, the stem, it appears to have died like in this area. The stem is all brown. It's almost like woody. And, this is obviously something that's very discouraging. But as gardeners, what you have to try to do is learn from your mistakes and just stay positive and just stick with it. Even real advanced gardeners still have things that don't go well. At the end of the day, a lot of this is still controlled by Mother Nature. You can do a lot of things to set yourself up for success, but at the end of the day, a lot of this is Mother Nature, and gardening can be hard. So I'm trying to show you guys that it doesn't always work out for me. I don't really know what happened with this tomato plant. I suspect it's some type of disease, but it's hard to say. I'm still learning a lot about plant diseases. So I don't really know what happened here. If you remember, there's an empty space here in front of this plant. So now I've had 2 tomato plants die in this area. So I'm starting to wonder if I don't have something going on in the soil in this area. But I just wanted to show you guys that. My plan is I'm going to remove this tomato plant. Whenever you remove a lot of stuff that I take out of my garden, leaves that I prune, I often put that material into my compost bin. But if you have a plant that you think might have disease, like I think this tomato might have some type of a disease, you would never want to put that plant into your compost bin. You could risk, transferring that disease into your compost and then throwing it back into your garden. So I'll remove this tomato plant and just throw it away. Now what I'm going to do, if you guys remember, last weekend I bought some more eggplant transplants. So what I'm going to do is in this area here, I'm going to plant 2 eggplants and see how they do. If they die, that pretty much confirms that I got something going on in the soil right there. But who knows? Maybe they'll do okay. It's just hard to say. But once again, just wanted to show you guys, things don't always work out in the garden. I post a lot of nice pictures and pictures of my successes, but for everything that works out, I deal with a lot of issues, especially where I garden. I have a lot of heat and humidity, and I deal with a lot of challenges. The other thing I wanted to show you guys or talk to you about are my yellow squash plants. And if you look at these plants from a distance, they look great. They look nice and healthy, and in my opinion, the plants are healthy. But I planted these transplants quite a while ago, and by now I should have been harvesting mature yellow squash. Quite a few. I should have been harvesting lots of squash. What's been happening with these plants, and this is a situation where I think I know what I did wrong. But what's been happening is I get lots of yellow squash that form. If you look under here, there's lots of small yellow squash. But what's been frustrating is the squash just aren't getting any bigger. They just remain this little tiny size. The first thing that I would consider would be maybe I have a pollination issue. These plants, if you look at these young squash, they have these flowers on them. And to grow large yellow squash, these fruits need to be pollinated by bees. And if they don't get pollinated, they'll never form. But I don't think I have a pollination issue. Let me show you one here that didn't get pollinated. Here's a good example. If you look at, I'm going to pull this right off of here. See this fruit? The end of it gets real brown. These are 2 yellow squash that did not get pollinated. And when that happens, the ends turn brown and the little fruit just gets real soft and dies and falls off the plant. That happens every year. Whenever you grow yellow squash or zucchini, your summer squash, all your fruit will not get pollinated every time. You're always going to have some that end up, looking like this. But in my situation, the squash is getting pollinated. They're just not getting any bigger. If you look in here, see these squash, they're not dying or turning brown on the ends. They're just not getting any larger. And what I think happened, if you guys remember, I planted some things in this garden space way too early. We had some really warm weather in late February. And here in zone 8B, my average last frost date is March 1st. So I planted these yellow squash on March 19th. I was thinking I'm 3 weeks after my last frost. We had some warm weather. I thought I was fine. Well, unfortunately, that following week, we had a 4 or 5 day stretch of some pretty cold weather for my area. We never had a frost, because a frost would have absolutely killed these squash. But we had a 4 or 5 night stretch where we had overnight temperatures in the high 30s. And I talked in a previous video, I ended up losing a number of my tomato plants at that time from the cold nights. So I had to replant a lot of my tomatoes. So what I think happened was these squash, they didn't die, but they were stunted. The cold just kind of zapped them. And these plants have just never really recovered. The leaves themselves, on a healthy yellow squash, the leaves tend to be a little bit bigger than these leaves. The plants are just kind of small. And like I say, it's just been so frustrating because I have yet to harvest a single yellow squash, and by now I should have, and they're just not getting any bigger. So the lesson that I learned was I will never again risk planting things that early. Before this year, I typically plant these warm season crops the first or second week of April. But you know how it is in the spring. It was a warm February, warm March. I just got excited. You get anxious to plant things. And I think I just planted these yellow squash way too early. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm just going to leave them here. Maybe they'll bounce back. I noticed today I have a couple squash that seem to be getting a little bit bigger. There's one right here that I could harvest, and I have another one over on this plant that seems to be growing a little bit larger than the other ones. But in general, these plants aren't thriving. So I absolutely love yellow squash. So this is very discouraging, but this is going back to the bigger topic of what I kind of wanted to talk about in this video. Is it's easy sometimes, especially if you're a beginning gardener, if you have things that don't work out. You might have a plant that dies, or things aren't always going to go to plan. But what you want to try to do is always try to learn from these, observe what happens in your garden, take notes, and try to learn from that. So like I say, next year I will just remember to not plant anything in this garden, no matter how warm it is, till like the first or second week of April. And I think I'll have better luck. And hopefully, the thing that worries me about this tomato is sometimes if you have a disease issue, diseases can be in your soil. So I'm just really crossing my fingers that whatever happened to this tomato plant is an isolated issue, and that it doesn't start to affect my other tomatoes. So that's what I wanted to show you guys, that it often can be frustrating as a gardener when you're trying to grow your own food. There's lots of issues that you're going to deal with, but you just have to really try to learn from what happens in your garden, and just do the best next time to prevent that from happening. So I hope this video was helpful. The sun's starting to go down here. It's a real nice night here tonight. But as always, I wanted to thank you guys for watching my videos. I hope you get something out of it. And let's see what's happening next. This weekend, I'm going to harvest the last of my potatoes. And I'm going to plant some okra and just do some basic maintenance in the garden, some weeding and cultivating. So once again, thank you for watching and joining me here tonight, and I can't wait to see you next time at Southern Tier Gardening.